The little girl had not spoken a single word in 3 years, but that afternoon, in the middle of a crowded playground, she suddenly grabbed a stranger's hand and whispered one word that made her billionaire mother collapse to her knees. It was not a word her therapists had ever heard. It was not a word her teachers had ever heard. It was the one word her mother had secretly stopped hoping she would ever say again. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to our channel so you can remain part of our family and our community for more stories that remind us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change a life forever. Marianne Whitmore had everything money could buy and nothing money could fix. At 39, she was the founder and chief executive of a technology empire that had made her one of the wealthiest women in America. Her name appeared on magazine covers, her photograph hung in conference rooms, and people waited months for a chance to sit across from her. Yet every morning, the most important thing in her world was a quiet little girl named Elodie. Elodie was 7 years old, delicate and pale, with soft chestnut hair that curled around her cheeks and enormous gray eyes that seemed to hold far more feelings than her silence could express. 3 years earlier, after a terrifying event that Marianne rarely allowed herself to remember in full, Elodie had stopped speaking. Doctors had found nothing physically wrong with her vocal cords. Specialists had called it trauma-related mutism. Therapists had tried games, music, animals, drawings, rewards, and countless gentle exercises. Nothing worked. Elodie could communicate with gestures, expressions, and drawings, but her voice had disappeared behind some invisible wall inside her. Marianne had spent a fortune trying to bring that voice back. She had hired specialists from 3 different states. She had taken Elodie to private clinics and child psychologists. She had built a beautiful therapy room inside their mansion filled with toys and books. She had even canceled business trips and important meetings whenever another specialist promised that perhaps this time would be different. But every attempt seemed to leave Elodie more frightened. Eventually, Marianne realized that she had begun treating her daughter's silence like a problem to be solved instead of a wound that needed to be understood. Still, she could not stop trying. She was terrified that if she stopped searching, she would be admitting that the little girl she loved might never speak again. That Saturday afternoon, Marianne decided to take Elodie to a public playground near the river. It was something she had not done in years. Their lives had become too carefully protected. Security guards followed them everywhere. Drivers waited nearby. Tutors came to the house. Even simple childhood experiences had become scheduled events. But Marianne wanted Elodie to see children running freely, climbing slides, chasing bubbles, and laughing without adults asking them to perform. She wanted her daughter to experience something normal, even if only for an hour. Elodie sat quietly on a wooden bench while Marianne watched her from a few feet away. Children raced across the playground, parents pushed swings, and a golden retriever chased a bright red ball. Then Elodie noticed a little boy struggling with a toy helicopter near the sandbox. His father knelt beside him, repairing the broken rotor with remarkable patience. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a quiet alertness that seemed unusual for an ordinary afternoon at a playground. His name was Callum Reed, a 36-year-old single father who worked as a physical security consultant after leaving the Navy. Most people who met him simply saw a reserved father with a 7-year-old son. Very few knew that Callum had once served as a Navy SEAL, spent years in dangerous places, and returned home carrying memories he rarely discussed. Callum's son, Owen, finally got the helicopter working and ran across the grass with it. Callum smiled, but his eyes followed the boy constantly. He noticed everything. A loose swing chain. A cyclist approaching too quickly. A dog slipping its collar. A toddler wandering away from a distracted parent. His instincts had never truly left him. Yet there was nothing cold about him. If anything, fatherhood had softened the edges that military life had carved into him. Elodie watched Owen fly the helicopter. When the boy accidentally dropped it near her feet, she picked it up and held it toward him. Owen smiled and thanked her before running back to his father. Callum looked at Elodie and gave her a warm smile, but he did not ask her name. He did not ask why she was quiet. He simply nodded in thanks. That small gesture mattered more than Marianne realized. A few minutes later, a sudden commotion erupted near the climbing structure. A little boy had climbed too high and slipped between two bars. His father rushed toward him, but Callum was already moving. His SEAL instincts returned in an instant. He reached the child, stabilized him, and calmly helped him down before panic could spread. Nothing dramatic happened after that. The boy was shaken but safe. The other parents thanked Callum. He simply checked the child's arms and knees before returning to Owen. But Elodie had watched every second. She had watched how quickly Callum moved without frightening anyone. She had watched how gently he spoke to the crying boy. She had watched how he immediately looked around to make sure no other child was in danger. Then she looked at her mother and pointed toward him. Marianne understood the question. She nodded. Elodie walked slowly toward Callum. Marianne followed at a distance, nervous but unwilling to interfere. Elodie stopped beside Callum and looked at his hands. One knuckle carried an old scar. There were smaller scars along his wrist. Callum noticed her staring but did not hide them. Instead, he sat down on the grass. He made himself smaller. He waited. Elodie sat beside him. For several minutes, neither spoke. Callum did not try to make her talk. He did not ask her to smile. He did not tell her that everything would be okay. He simply sat there while Owen flew his helicopter nearby. Then Elodie pointed toward Callum's scar. Callum touched it and explained that he had gotten it while helping someone who needed him. Elodie looked at him carefully. Callum then pointed toward her heart. He asked if something had happened that made her afraid. Elodie froze. Marianne immediately stepped forward, terrified that he had crossed a boundary. But Callum stopped himself before saying anything else. He shook his head gently and showed Elodie that she did not have to answer. Then he picked up a small stick and drew 2 circles in the dirt. One circle represented fear. The other represented courage. He placed a tiny line between them and tapped it. 1 step. That was all. Elodie stared at the drawing. Then, for the first time in 3 years, she made a sound. It was barely audible. A tiny breath shaped into something that almost resembled a word. Marianne's heart stopped. Elodie looked frightened by her own voice and immediately covered her mouth. Callum did not react with excitement. He did not clap. He did not celebrate. He simply smiled as though she had done something perfectly ordinary. That was exactly what Elodie needed. Over the following weeks, Marianne began bringing Elodie back to the playground. Callum was there often because Owen loved the place. Their friendship grew slowly. Marianne initially remained suspicious. She had built her entire life around protecting her daughter, and she did not trust easily. But Callum never asked for money, never asked about Marianne's company, and never behaved as though her wealth impressed him. He treated her like a mother who was exhausted and afraid. One afternoon, Elodie drew a picture of 3 people standing beneath a bright sun. One was herself. One was Marianne. The third was Callum. Marianne stared at it with tears in her eyes. She realized something painful. Elodie had not needed another expert. She had needed someone who did not see her silence as something broken. But just when hope began to return, the past came rushing back. A former employee of Marianne's company leaked photographs of Elodie to the media. The story spread quickly, claiming that Marianne's daughter was mysteriously unable to speak and suggesting that Marianne had hidden the truth from investors. Reporters appeared outside the family's property. Cameras followed Marianne's car. Elodie became frightened again. She stopped going outside. She stopped drawing. She stopped looking toward the playground. Marianne blamed herself. Then Callum arrived at the house. Marianne was furious at first. She told him that Elodie needed distance and that their friendship had become too complicated. Callum accepted the criticism without anger. Before leaving, he placed a small wooden helicopter on the doorstep. It was the same model Owen had been flying at the playground. He did not ask Elodie to come outside. He did not ask her to speak. He simply left it there. The next morning, Elodie picked it up. Then she walked toward the front door. Marianne watched from behind her. Elodie pointed toward the driveway. She wanted to go out. Marianne understood. For the first time, she stopped trying to control what happened next. She took her daughter's hand. They went to the playground. Callum was there with Owen. But before they could reach him, a car suddenly accelerated through the nearby parking area. A driver had lost control while trying to avoid another vehicle. Callum reacted instantly. He grabbed Owen and moved him behind a concrete barrier. Marianne pulled Elodie toward safety. The car crashed into a fence. Everyone froze. Elodie began shaking violently. Callum immediately knelt beside her. He did not touch her without permission. He simply held out his hand. Elodie looked at it. Then she took it. Callum breathed slowly, deliberately, showing her how to regulate her fear. Elodie copied him. One breath. Then another. Then another. Marianne watched her daughter regain control. But something inside Elodie had changed. She looked toward Callum. Her lips trembled. And then, in a tiny, broken whisper, she said the word that would change everything. Daddy. Marianne dropped to her knees. The word was not meant for Callum. It was not a replacement for her father, whom Elodie had lost during the traumatic event years earlier. It was simply the word Elodie associated with safety. The word she had been unable to say. The word that had been trapped inside her for years. Callum's eyes filled with tears. He gently told her that she already had a mother who loved her more than anything in the world, and that she did not have to call anyone anything she did not want to. Elodie looked at Marianne. Then she ran into her mother's arms. Marianne held her tightly, sobbing into her daughter's hair. For years, Marianne had believed that she had to fix Elodie. Now she finally understood that her daughter had never been broken. She had been frightened. And healing had begun the moment someone gave her permission to be afraid without demanding that she become brave immediately. Callum eventually told Marianne about his own struggles after leaving the military. He had once believed that strength meant never showing fear, never asking for help, and never admitting that certain memories still hurt. Fatherhood had taught him otherwise. Owen had taught him that real courage was not the absence of fear. It was staying present when fear came. Marianne finally admitted that her wealth had become another kind of armor. She had used money, security, doctors, lawyers, and control to protect herself from the possibility of losing Elodie again. But in doing so, she had accidentally built walls around the very child she wanted to save. She apologized to Elodie. Not because she had been a bad mother. Because she had been a frightened one. Elodie listened. Then she reached for her mother's hand. That was her forgiveness. Months passed. Elodie began speaking more often. At first it was only single words. Then short sentences. Her voice was soft and sometimes shaky, but it was hers. She returned to school. She made friends. She began laughing again. Callum and Marianne became closer too, but their relationship was never rushed. It grew through ordinary moments, playground afternoons, school events, grocery trips, and long walks beside the river. Callum taught Elodie how to repair small toys. Marianne taught Owen how to build simple computer games. Their lives slowly became intertwined, not because anyone needed rescuing anymore, but because they had learned how much stronger people could become when they stopped trying to carry everything alone. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year after that first meeting, Elodie stood at the same playground where her voice had first returned. Owen was flying his helicopter. Callum sat on a bench. Marianne watched her daughter running across the grass. Elodie suddenly turned around. She smiled. Then she called out clearly, confidently, and loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Mom!" Marianne covered her mouth. Elodie ran into her arms. Callum watched with tears in his eyes. Marianne held her daughter close and realized that the greatest miracle had never been hearing Elodie's voice. It had been watching her become unafraid to use it. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before you go, leave a comment telling us what you believe Elodie's story teaches us about healing, patience, and love. Sometimes people do not need us to fix them. Sometimes they simply need us to sit beside them, hold out a hand, and remind them that they are safe enough to take one more step. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the billionaire who can buy anything, and not the ex-SEAL trained to survive impossible situations. Sometimes the strongest person is a frightened little child who finds the courage to speak again. And sometimes, the person who helps unlock that courage is not a doctor, a therapist, or an expert at all. Sometimes it is simply a kind human being who looks at someone else's silence and says, without demanding a single word, that they are willing to stay.